Hi everyone, welcome to the Digital Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, also Tom. Tom, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm Tom Moore, a native of New Zealand, but living in the United States. I'm a founding principal of 3 software companies that do optimization for large companies.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, Tom? What are the 3 companies and what kind of optimization? Because it's a very broad term.
Understood. We started out in 1992 working for Procter & Gamble, and they had a problem that was, how do we pick cases and load trucks in a way that is going to be damage-free, legal, and most importantly, highly productive? And we developed technology on this way and also expanded that into load optimization, which is saying, what's the minimum number of trucks we can get on each load? It's a highly mathematically difficult problem. And so that was our entree, if you will, into optimization in the supply chain. Subsequent to that, we went in and developed a system that actually sits on top of the warehouse management system and tells the WMS what to do. You know, warehouse management systems are really good at knowing where the inventory is and assigning a task to a user, but they're not very good at saying, we're going to unload this truck over here, and we're going to load this truck at 3 o'clock, and we're going to make all those connections between receiving, picking, and loading. We've developed the technology that makes those decisions for it, so it's really the brain for the warehouse management system. And lastly, the third company that we've developed is the bridge between planning and execution. If you think about the plans that come out of a supply planning system, they react to every little change in customer demand. And they do it in such a way that they generate, I'll call it a sawtooth, really a difficult pattern of shipments. One day you can get 24 shipments, and the next day you can get 3 shipments doing deployment on a particular lane. And that's not a made-up example. That's a very real example from one of our major clients. How do you manage transportation? How do you manage the warehouse? How do you do all those things in that environment? And the level load product is designed to smooth that out, looking forward and saying, hey, we've got a big peak coming up. Let's pull some of that forward. Let's push some of the things that we don't need quite so urgently back. And let's make sure that we control in such a way that not only are we meeting customer service goals, but we're also reducing the variability in the supply chain.
Okay. I mean, let's take a step back. You've got these 3 companies. You still haven't mentioned their names. So,
well, I'm trying to be non-commercial, but the first company which does the case picking and truck loading is called Transportation Warehouse Optimization. The second company, which is the brain for the warehouse, is called autoscheduler.ai. And the third is Provision AI, which is the company that does the level loading. So, yeah, we've developed technology, and again, I want to make this as educational as possible, and I really feel badly when somebody is really, we're going to push our own software all the way through, right?
Good. So tell me how this all started. What made you wake up one morning and say to yourself, I should start 3 companies optimizing for other companies?
You know, it's not. It obviously doesn't work that way. And what happens is a company comes to you and says, "I've got a problem," and you listen to that problem and you go, "Gee, I wonder if there's a solution to that." You know, I'm a mathematician by training and business mathematics, operations research in particular, and having worked in that area, you sort of look at problems in a somewhat different and more quantitative way, and being able to take a client's need and translate it into something that solves that need, that's the ultimate way of working. But one of the big challenges is a lot of this is extremely difficult from a mathematics perspective. You know, this whole concept of case picking and truck loading in itself, from a mathematical perspective, is a complex combinatorial problem, and to solve it truly would take a lot of computers and a lot of time to do. So the question is, how do you do it quickly? Okay. Similarly, when you're looking at the warehouse managements and saying, hey, how do I control all these different things that are going on? And there are hundreds of things happening because there are lots of different people, lots of different actors, etc. And so the solution to that requires making sure that when you squeeze the balloon over here, that it doesn't pop out somewhere else. So managing across that whole network of activities in a warehouse is itself a very complex problem, but relatively, I won't say easy to solve, but mathematically it's easy to put together. And the same is true in the warehouse network, where you're thinking about level loading from a plant to a DC. Operationally, you can look at things like linear programming and manage across the whole network. The problem is that doesn't work very well when it comes to thinking about what's going to go on trucks, because most of our clients are large CPG companies. They don't ship between their warehouses with anything other than full truckloads. So while one particular product, we might need 50 cases urgently, what else is going to go on that truck, and how does that dilute the urgency of that particular truck? So really complex combinatorial problems. There is a solution, but it's because people have come to us and said, hey, we've got this problem, and how do we solve it? Okay.
And I mean, these kind of problems, why are they important? Talk to me about, what are the implications of solving them versus not for companies?
Okay. When we think about case picking, truck loading, and load optimization, we're shipping today thousands of shipments from plants to customer-facing distribution centers. Now, if we can reduce that adds value not only to the customer, not only to the environment, but it also adds value to the carriers, etc. So when you think about that as an opportunity, and we're very proud to say that last year we took 88,000 truck journeys off the road. Well, that's wow. A significant contribution, right? That is a significant contribution. We'd like it to be 188,000, but we're slowly growing that. So that's the number one benefit of truckload optimization. You're saving somewhere between 4 and 8% of the trucks, simply by being much smarter about how you put things together on a truck in a way that it truly fills it up. Second, when you're dealing in the warehouse, the problem that people came to us with was, my first shift pilot, planner, however you want to think about it, he's coming to us and saying, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And then when second shift comes in, they go, oh, that's a silly way to do it. And they come back and change it and do something differently. And then third shift, they haven't got a clue, so they don't do anything that's particularly intelligent. And I'm exaggerating here, but
Sure.
it's a challenge because there's no procedures process that actually helps somebody put all the different pieces together. You think of a large warehouse that has maybe 100 employees on shift. You've got to manage what all those 100 employees are doing, plus automation, plus the fact that you've got these random variables with trucks coming in late and other folks showing up early, and and hundreds of variables in the process. And the goal is to get things out the door in a way that the customer and ultimately the consumer gets them on time. So, as we go through cycle through the three companies, this level loading concept, what's the benefit? Oh, when you're up at that 24, I mentioned before, 24 trucks one day, 3 the next. First of all, when you're at 24 trucks, you are not using the carriers you want to use. You are scraping the bottom of the barrel, bad words, for carriers. The next day, your contract carrier he's sitting there going, well, where's the volume? So that's really, it's really making that smoother, makes it good for the transportation cost, and that's where the big savings are. The next bit savings are in labor in the warehouse, both the shipping and the receiving warehouse. Third is we don't have trailers sitting waiting to be unloaded at the receiving warehouse, because if you ship 24 in one day, 24 arrives at the other end as kind of a fixed period of time. And similarly, it's good for the carrier. When we do a carrier bid, most companies say, I'm going to give you 250 loads a year, which they probably think is one a day for in reality, they give you 20 on one day and 0 for the next 19 days, and then they'll give you 15 and etc. You understand the issues, and they build into their costs the fact that there's this huge variability, and they're going to be deadheading trailers into meet those 15 shipments on one day and be looking for work on the next. So again, one of the benefits, the benefits really are really reducing the costs of transportation, reducing the costs of labor, making life more predictable, and of course there's the environmental benefits for less deadhead miles, much better load fill, therefore less trucks on the road. So really a win-win-win all the way around.
Okay. And you've been in the business, as you said, for many years now. What kinds of changes have you seen, particularly, let's say, in the last 5 years in those sectors?
I think that there've always been leaders in the business. We work with a few of them: Procter & Gamble, Nestle, Unilever. Folks who are prepared to make significant investments and understand the values of eliminating waste in their supply chains. I think what's really new is that smaller companies are starting to look and say, well, hey, we can do this too. So we're dealing with now companies that are historically, they would never have come to us because they wouldn't have even have thought of some of the technology or the need for such technology. Now that I think they're seeing it. So that's one major improvement, I think, in total supply chain. As you think about the other factor, and I'm old enough to remember that many years ago, a lot of companies had these little operations research groups, and I thought I was going to be part of one of them many years ago. And they all kind of said, these systems don't work. They get lost, or they don't work. They come in and they have great promise, and they never quite get off the ground, and they don't get accepted, etc. And therefore, that was sort of out of vogue to use systems. If you talked about a solution, that was okay. If you talked about a system, systems are expensive, they don't work, and I mean that's the whole thing. And now you see people much more willing to accept, hey, we can't get this through with manpower alone. We have to use some form of intelligence. That intelligence really revolves around systems, and which flows very nicely into this whole thing with AI. You notice that 2 of our companies have AIs in their name. Okay.
Yeah.
Why is that? Well, AI continues to develop, and I'll just talk about this level loading product. One of the challenges is, of course, that you have to ship things, as I said before, in truckloads between your plants and your distribution centers. You can't afford to ship little bits and pieces because that's not how large CPG companies work. And one of the challenges is that there's no really good way of determining what goes on a truck without spending a lot of time doing extensive combinatorial optimization, which is what our product from Transportation Warehouse Optimization does, except it takes a lot of time. It takes time. So with AI, we're able to come up with some much better truck loading estimation. It's not precise, but it's estimation of what's actually going to go on each truck. And we were able to do this estimation really rapidly. So when we are dealing with a network, we can use a linear program, throw it over to AI and heuristics. They solve, this is what's going to go on this truck, send it back, and we can flip back and forth between the two. 5 years ago, we couldn't have done that. Okay.
Wow.
Today we can, and we're very fortunate. We received a patent for some of the technology. Not wrong words. We can't patent technology for the processes that we've developed. So really, again, what's happened in the last 5 years? Explosion of AI, and everybody's talking about it. Some actually know what they're talking about, and some don't.
As one of the people who doesn't know about it, talk to me a bit about it. I mean, obviously there's huge interest now in the likes of large language models as a result of the launch of ChatGPT last November and the various other open source large language models that have sprung up in the meantime. But you're not talking about large language models, are you? You're talking about another kind of AI, and this is the thing about AI. There are so many different types of AI. Everything from Siri on my phone to ChatGPT also on my phone, but and everything in between. Talk to me a little bit about the differences in the AIs and the ones that are particularly useful for what you're doing.
I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in AI. So just stop there. I can tell you that we use something called reinforcement learning. Okay, and reinforcement learning is conceptually very easy, operationally, and whoever came up with this is brilliant. And so I'm not going to pretend I fully understand it. But the concept is, if you can give some form of reward function and give a computer enough time to think about how to solve a problem and check itself off of a reward, it learns how the best way of doing things.
It's gamifying
AI. It is indeed. And it takes, hundreds of thousands of iterations and hours of computer time to come up with, I now know how to do this. Okay. That's brilliant. Unfortunately, people are using AI as kind of, I'll call it the panacea. And one of the things that AI, as in its current form, is not particularly good at is chaining events. And go back to my warehouse example. You've got to unload something before you can put it away, before you can pick it, before you can stage it, before you can load it. Those things have to be tightly controlled and put together. AI is not particularly good at that. Okay. But go to the other extreme where you're looking and saying, how do I look at demand patterns and say I can forecast what it's going to be over the next weeks based on different knowledge, like the concept of, if I can see what's going across the scanner in a large retailer, I can possibly estimate when they're going to replenish that. Okay, and so. True. Those are the kinds of things that AI has been well used for, and that's got a good long history of doing that.
Cool. The other big trends I think we're seeing in supply chain are things like the rise of automation and IoT and things like that. Have you come across any of those at all, or is that more or less outside your remit?
We work with those. We are not doing the automation. But if you think about, again, go back to the warehouse, automation has been slowly filtering in. In our world, automatic layer picking, everybody's working automatic layer picking. It makes a lot of sense. Okay. When it comes to robotic forklifts, again, been around a long time, moving product around, whether you call them AGVs or self-guided forklifts. They work, and they work very effectively. Okay.
Sure.
Automated case picking is the jury's still out on automated case picking because of the complexity associated with it. There are some examples of it, and it seems to work. In some instances, I'm not convinced that it doesn't actually cost more in terms of support and labor today. But automation's there, but you have to think about activities in a warehouse in particular. We call them actors, right? An actor could be a person, it could be an automated layer picker, it could be anything. And actors have some capability to do particular tasks at a particular rate. And from our perspective, we just need to plan around that. One of the challenges with automation is, you can't make those AGV forklifts move any faster. Okay.
Sure.
They still have all the safety features, which is good in place, but you watch one break down in an aisle, and then you watch the next one comes along and it sits there and waits for the other one, and then the next one comes along and it waits for the other two, etc. And it's sort of humorous Keystone Cops kind of thing. There are still things that need to happen to make automation work more efficiently and improve warehouse operations. But as we say, our auto scheduler product has to look at all those things, understand what the capacities are, and manage to their capacities. You can't put a 8-foot forklift through a 4-foot door, right? So we're still dealing with those kinds of issues.
Sure. And we looked back over the last 5 years and saw what changes, or we just talked about what changes have typically happened in the last 4 or 5 years. What about the coming 4 or 5 years, or 10 years, if you want to go that far out? Where do you see things going?
Well, 5 years ago, Gartner predicted there'd be what they call convergence. Okay, and the convergence is of the planning systems to the operational systems, because we're not linking the whole supply chain yet. Okay, and that convergence, the level load product is a product that drives convergence. We are converging from, essentially the manufacturing and planning system all the way through to the warehouse. But, we're not reaching back yet, and this is back to vendors, and we're not pushing back out to the many grocery and other warehouses that we're shipping to. So we've looked at this much of the supply chain. We're going to eventually get to this much of the supply chain. You can't see my hands, but we're getting bigger and bigger. And the whole goal here really is converging all the disparate parts. The big challenge, of course, and this is really hard, because you've got to now start trusting your vendors, and you've now got to start working and having your customers trust you. And that's probably where the biggest gap is. From a pure systems and processing, I think all this is doable. It has to be a leap of faith, and I don't see that leap of faith happening today, tomorrow, but 5-10 years down the road, maybe there'll be a lot more connections among nodes in the supply chain.
Okay, and what are your plans for your companies for the upcoming 3, 4, 5, 10 years?
We're growing in our niches. Okay, we are definitely niche oriented and niche focused, and defending our turf, obviously, against others. That's the simple thing. Where we see load optimization happening is not just for the large Unilevers of the world, but all the way down to companies that are shipping 10, 15 trucks a week, down at that level. We see it also for not just deployment, but we also see it for customer shipments, where customers are now having faith. I was working with a company the other day that ships to Tesco in the UK, and they're shipping 46 pallets on a truck that takes 52. It might be 48 on 52. And you go, okay, well, why are you doing that? Well, because we can't fully accurately predict, based on the various pieces that are in the load, how we're going to fit that jigsaw puzzle that's a load together. Well, I think there are things that we can do to help that. Okay, so that's one area that I think is going to add distinct value. As we talk about the warehouse, it's not just the warehouse. We just announced this week, Auto Scheduler is now partnered with one of the visibility companies. So the visibility company, Forkites in this case, is saying, hey, this truck's going to be late, or this truck's going to be early. Now, that adds value to the warehouse operations, And we can, in fact, now plan with more certainty rather than we think this truck's going to be there at, 10 o'clock, And that expansion, and again, comes back to expanding that convergence concept. And the whole level loading process, we see that level loading process moving out, again, upstream and downstream. Customers, shipping to a warehouse in a customer location and shipping them 15 loads in a day or 5 loads in a day, that doesn't help them in the slightest. Okay, and actually one of the problems that needs to be solved, and we're thinking about how to solve that right now, is how does a big purchasing organization buy in such a way that they know that when that truck actually arrives, there'll be a dock door for it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're scratching the surface here. We've got a great opportunity to expand.
Cool. We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Tom. Is there any question I haven't asked that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to think about?
That's always the toughest question in the world, okay? And I think that one of the areas that we continue to work on is hey, what's the customer doing? What's the plant doing? What's the warehouse doing? We don't spend enough time talking about carriers. Okay? Trucking companies across the world are suffering, and they're suffering from driver retention issues, managing an extremely volatile business. Pricing, certainly in North America, goes like this. It is really a challenge to manage and be in the trucking business. It's a boom-bust cycle. And somehow we need to work on managing trucking in a way that we think about it just the same way as we think about any other resource. There's a person from Forrester, George Lowry, who really thinks that we should be including carriers basically in our supply chain planning and helping them with it. The problem we have certainly is in North America, the majority of trucks are in fleets that are way less than 50 trucks. So that there's a real challenge in this whole management because we're dealing with such small entities who don't invest in technology, etc. So this is a whole area that I think worthy of a lot more discussion, and probably with people who know a lot more about it than I do. But I think that's something that you haven't asked about because, frankly, no one does. Okay, that's just we just assume we've got infinite number of trucks and infinite capacity, and have at it.
Cool. Tom, that's been fascinating. If people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we discussed on the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
They can go to any of our websites, transportation optimization.com or autoscheduler.ai or provisionai.com. But they can also just send me an email, tom.moore@t-wo.com.
Fantastic. Tom, that's been great. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
It's always good, and it's great to see a man with a great hat.